So much for staying around this late in the afternoon. I turned down the lights, but I hope people will not doze off. They, um, so I first came to back to Stockholm to work at Stockholm University about 9 years ago, and just first it was I came over for consultation, and then began working with a master's program in a research school, and with Mara and Eva and Lisa, and it's been such a rewarding relationship across those years. Um, I'm so pleased to hear the presentations today and how productive they've been, and really the wonderful work that you're doing. I very much appreciate Dr. Sandal's work. Want to let you know that she and you may not know this, but she and I were doctoral students together at the University of Washington. So when I was running my little social skills groups, she was down the hall doing other things. We both worked in the experimental education unit at the University of Washington, and have been colleagues over the years. We collaborated on a national investigation, a national research study on inclusion in preschool classrooms. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that study. But my goal today is to address the question, how do we continue the good work we are now doing when researchers leave? The Susan talked a little bit about how it's a common phenomenon that we as researchers go in, we work in schools with teachers and do our research. We always try to leave the procedures, the methods, the strategies back with the teachers when we do our research, and then give them to teachers who may have been in what we call control groups or may have not been active implementers. But we still we still leave. I um, I was talking to another colleague about efficacy research or doing research that determines the effects of a program like dialogic reading and how that's different from a program or a set of actions that we would do to ensure sustainability. So what that means, ensure that the effective approaches are going to continue after the researcher leaves. And that question or that idea is really sort of it requires a different set of actions than the efficacy research that we do. And I'm going to talk some about that today. Uh, all of you, this probably has never happened to any of you here, but some people, like this man right here, has this program that he gets into to lose weight, and in fact does accomplish that program, but when he hits his goal, he forgets that. He assumes that the goal is going to be met, and then it's accomplished. Of course, we know what happens after that. We indulge in like the afternoon pikas we had here, and other maybe go back to drinking beer or whatever. So this notion of sustainability is a really important, fundamental, universal concept that goes beyond schools alone. Uh, I think one of the things about sustainability is to this adage, begin with the end in mind, or what do you want, what it is you want to sustain. And um, so what I heard today was actually a really, really good vision of what you want to sustain. So, so, uh, Certainly, inclusion of special need kids in preschools is a broader goal. Is a broad goal that you have, and the strategies that you're using are going to support that goal. But the more specific goals that you have talked about today and that you've been working on for years are related to dialogic reading, playtime, social dialogic reading, improving vocabulary for kids who are just learning vocabulary or who may need more assistance or may need assistance in comprehension, in playtime, social time that can support social integration, joint engagement and play activities, forming social relationship. You have a really good fix on that. And that puts you a step up on this next part of sustaining. My colleague Brian Boyd and colleagues Brian Boyd and Auburn Stammer and I and a couple of our doctoral students wrote a editorial this last year about what one does in order to think about sustaining, or not just sustaining, but spreading the news, which is also in the U.S. It's called scaling up. You have a term in Swedish, I know, that would do that. What are the things that need to happen in order for a really effective program that can be continued after it's over, and that we can share with other people outside of just our districts or our municipalities, or so. When I think about the work that you have done so far, you have a number of those things already checked off the list. You're already in a good location to sustain and possibly to elaborate and to expand the reach of what you've done. Community partnership and exploration began very early. Mara and Eva and Maria and perhaps Rasmus met with preschool teachers, described what dialogic reading is, what social time playtime is, explored whether it fit the goals that you have. That really solid early participation reshaped probably some of the strategies so that it fit the preschools, which led to your preschools, your programs deciding that, yes, I want to do this, and began engaging in planning and preparation of how you would go about doing it in the preschools. I heard today about some of the programs. Some of you are leaders in your programs, administrators, directors, and allowed or allocated adequate resources needed for installation or to begin using the program. Those resources are things like time, maybe some materials. You know what they are, but any type of intervention, any type of program adoption like this requires resources. The research grant provided perhaps probably some of the resources. The initial implementation, or just starting it off the first time, the first year. Some of you are probably in the first groups that use dialogic reading, or the first groups that use social time, playtime, social time. And you may had to reshape some things about it, or figure out how it was going to work in your preschool. And that notion of initial implementation is just that. We're just starting it off right now. We're going to try it out. We're going to see how it fits. We're going to change things if we need to, which may have led to, sounds like it's led to, a larger scale use of the program, or a use of the program across years. You got it, you adapted it, and now you're going to use it in either a larger context or for more time, not just the first time. So, um, so you've checked. When Brian and Alvin and I were thinking about implementation and how it's time to close the research to practice gap, uh, those were kind of those were the things that we picked out. We looked back at the literature. We thought about the work that we had done, and this was sort of the process to get us from initial research that may have begun with really controlled single case designs or researcher implemented designs, and then teacher implementation and use um, with broader confidence in the wide scale implementation. So organizational sustainment is what we're talking about today. That's the next notion. Um, we, in the paper, we talked about organizational sustainment ensure organizations have plans in place to continue implementation without research support. Their strategies like identifying funding, attempting final intervention adaptations that are needed, ongoing training of new staff. The and I heard today, again, pro, program from some program developers stating the intent of continuing what's already begun in your districts. And that's so encouraging to hear, because I'll mention in just a minute, that's one of the really key elements of, sustainability. So I have 6 points of advice. One point is to make inclusion and or programs as much a routine as fika is in Sweden. That is, so 10:30 we stop, we go, we have coffee, and then we go back to work. So it's just part of the routine. So having as a natural part of the day a a time of the day, not a long, it doesn't have to be a long time, but a time of the day where you're doing uh, dialogic book reading, or where you're doing playtime, social time. It's just kind of what we do. These two programs, I think, have an advantage in that they can fit into a routine that you probably are using in preschools. That is, as Susan said, you're probably already doing book reading, or you may already be doing book reading to a small group, and it just, for teachers, at least this happens in the U.S. For teachers, it just it shares with them a different way of doing it. Um, Social playtime, social time is a little different. It does require different a set of small groups with some directed learning that doesn't commonly happen in your program, but it's time contained. It doesn't go on for the rest of the year. The supports that are provided may go on for the rest of the year. That is, the naturally occurring activities that happen in the classroom where children have opportunities to play with their peers, and you as a teacher may provide ongoing supports. But they the 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 playtime, social time, the more kind of directed learning doesn't go on for the entire year, and it doesn't take a huge amount of time, but it does take some resources that are a little different what may occur. A second word of advice, tell your story. You've just started that today. So the two videos that you saw today are a great first step, a great tool in telling the story that about the successes in your preschool. If you're an advocate for dialogic reading or an advocate for playtime, social time, trying to get that information out to other teachers about what you're doing. the tool that the project has developed for hearing directly from teachers through the videos is such a great advantage. So in terms of um, in terms of elaborating or trying to spread the reach of the programs, this I think those tools are going to be good, as well as other ways you can tell your story. Uh, if you if you know local reporters, or parent groups. There may be a number of ways that you can just share the good work that you're doing, and that's like that will build a basis of confidence in the community that this is what should happen in preschools. Be aware of attitudinal barriers and resistance issues. This this picture came from the project that Susan and I worked on. Actually, it's Administrator's Guide to Preschool Inclusion. We published it a long time ago, and when I was looking through it this weekend, just for this presentation, it's just amazing to me how the issues that were happening in 2000, when around when this was published, are still happening today. They they it's a common well, they're still happening today. So I sent Mara and Eva a PDF copy of this, and they can send it out to you. It's all in English, so sorry, but but at the time we didn't have any Swedish people working with us, so we couldn't translate it. Um, so what kind of I probably don't have to tell you what the attitudinal barriers and resistance issues are. They um, it sounds like in the specific programs that you're working in, you've already maybe dealt with these, but it could be as you're trying to, if you want to kind of expand the reach of your program and see dialogic reading or playtime social time happen in other preschool programs in Sweden, you may run into things like turf barriers. Does that make any sense in Swedish? Turf barriers meaning that I'm responsible for the preschool, and I don't want you as a special educator coming in and kind of telling me what to do, or walking on my turf, my lawn. The So those issues certainly come up. So turf means lawn. Barry, they put up a fence that, and if we had more time, I could tell you some stories that we ran into on our project. Teacher preparedness barriers. We want inclusion to happen for our children with disabilities, but it's not fair to ask a teacher to accept a child with, especially that has maybe significant major challenges, without providing some preparation for the teacher about what's going to happen, and even some support within the preschool. I think disability awareness barriers, just an understanding about how a child's challenges or disabilities might be reflected when they come into the preschool program. So I work with children with autism now, mostly, and there are specific challenges that many children with autism have that if a teacher doesn't, that can be accommodated by not too many changes in the programs. Not all of them can be, but some. If the teacher doesn't know about that, their integration, their inclusion the inclusion of the child with autism is going to be harder for the teacher and harder for the child. Communication, collaboration, Susan has already talked about respect barriers, and so I'm not going to talk very much about that, except that in our project, and Susan and our project, uh, these came up as the number one uh, issue when inclusion did not work well. Uh, um, we were pretty naive back then. I was pretty naive back then. Susan's always been a little smarter about this than me. Because I thought the problems we're going to be confronted with were the children in the classroom and their interactions. But what we found to be a more important barrier, more major barrier, was communication. It was the adults in the room, and being able. So you already know that. An idea that someone is going to lose, a child is going to lose because this other child with disabilities is in the classroom and may require more support, may require more help. That is, by doing that, something's going to happen with my child. Now, I'll come back and talk about that in a minute. Recruit support from the leadership. I heard again from the leaders that are in the room. I heard very strong statements about support that we're going to be provided. But when you think about, again, elaboration, if extending the reach of your programs, if you want other places in Sweden to use either of these interventions or to promote inclusion, identifying who the leaders are, and trying to and starting with the convincing them that this is an important part. That's one way of doing it. The type of leadership is critical for starting new initiatives. So we did a little bit of research on this. There's different kind. All of you know that there are different kinds of leaders that are in programs. So there's some leaders that are not leaders. They just don't want anything to happen. So we'll kind of dismiss those. We'll put those over here. There's some leaders who we call laissez-faire in a term in the U.S., meaning that the leader will make sure that you have enough funds to run your program, but will let the preschool teacher do that program running. And there are some leaders that are called transformational, or they establish an attitude or a climate that encourages new practices or that may be existing. So being aware of those different types of leadership and as teachers, I'm actually preaching to the audience here because you all, the choir, we would call it preaching to the choir. You all already are believers that it sounds like that these are good things to do. But for teachers who want to start to use new innovative techniques in their program, it is possible to sort of shape those laissez-faire teachers into being transformational by attending to things that they do that allow some innovation to come in. Talking to them about, that's a good idea. You did that really well. Maybe taking them some of the brownies that we had over at the FICA. Preparing leaders by communicating what the effects are of your program, and those videos that we saw are going to be really good ways to do that. And then recognition of program efforts by other programs. Talking to other preschool teachers about the work that you do. Having a champion or team of champions. Now, what we mean by that is that in the U.S., this idea of a champion is an advocate for the program, or someone who within the organization is going to promote the program. Someone who's very interested, and it helps if that someone has leadership, maybe a more senior person in the program. Um, um, that I wanted to share this one example of. Let me check the time. Okay. Um, I'll quickly share this one example and then be pretty close to ending. In California, um, there was a program that we started that was to promote evidence-based practices for children, teachers' use of evidence-based practices for children with autism. We work with six uh, programs, classrooms, sort of programs in the state of California. The state of California has thousands of classrooms, so our impact was that big. Uh, but there were two individuals who were well situated within the state government who became advocates of the program, and through their work they identified leaders in 35 plus districts who became advocates, and those leaders have trained 400 and something teachers now who are using those evidence-based practices in their programs around California. So it doesn't. And those the 35 people that they trained to go back were special education coordinators. They had some type of leadership position within in the program, um, and they became what we call the champions of use of evidence-based practice, or the advocates or supporters of evidence-based practices, and trained in their program. So that idea of having a champion in the preschool program that is next to you in your municipality um, in Sweden may be one strategy to work, or it could be more. It could be grander than that. Last, remember the power of the family voice. Prob- in terms of influence and change, families are probably going to have the strongest impact on change that can happen in your system, in your school system. At least in the U.S., I'm guessing it's true here. Uh, if we want to introduce change into our programs, we can, as advocates within the program, we can do the best we can to influence our leaders. Sometimes those influences may fall on deaf ears, as we would call it, or they may not be attended to or taken seriously. Um, Families can bring the power for leaders to hear more about the innovations that you have, and can allow a program to continue if um, this is one family. This sort of relates back to the comment that I had earlier. This is a family that we interviewed for our project. Um, she said, this is an interview of a preschool teacher. We had a parent come and say, I don't want my child eating with this other child. It happened to be, an Asian parent, but a parent talking about her child eating with a child with Down syndrome. That was at lunch. I explained that was the way things worked at our center, but I could tell she was kind of troubled. So I asked her if she would do me a favor and come to lunch one day so that she could see what happened when the children are mixed. So she came to lunch, and afterwards she came to me, and I'm pretty sure she had tears in her eyes, and she told me it was okay. So this idea of working with families, when you have families that are doubtful and think that their child is losing out, having them come and observe in the programs, which you probably already do, but that taking away an impression of a really good day in your program for a family member who may be able then to communicate it with the local administration about what a great job you're doing can be quite powerful. Okay, so the great thing about being a consultant, is that you can give all this advice and then you can leave. That's not a good strategy for most consultants, but it's sort of and I'm saying that facetiously. I hope you don't think I'm really believing that. So the things that I've said now make inclusion enter your program as much a routine as FICA. Tell your story. Be aware of attitudes and barriers. Recruit support from leadership. Have a champion or team of champions, and remember the power of the family voice. In terms of sustaining programs, those could be very useful strategies to take forward. So thank you again for the invitation to speak today, and good luck with your work.